Hello and welcome to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Usually I switch those two things around, so I'm really glad I nailed it this time. I'm Michael Austin, the supervising reporter here at the Western Journal. Today, I'm joined by Grant Atkinson, one of the reporters on my team, the guy I get to order around and he's basically my in-office servant, does whatever I want. And Tara Snyder, our amazing assignment editor.
Is she also your servant or no?
No. Well, she's not on my team.
Yeah, that's true.
No, we team up to make you our henchman.
Oh, okay, cool.
Look, we're all lowly peons here at the Western Journal. That's usually how it goes. I'm just kidding. It's the best place to work ever. Today, we're talking a lot about Kyle Rittenhouse, which is to be expected. His trial has been dominating headlines because he shouldn't even be on trial.
Yep.
Seems pretty clear that the dude is completely innocent, but nevertheless, we're still going with this whole charade, pretending that he's a white supremacist and all that stuff. So, we'll be talking about how Jacob Blake's uncle has been protesting outside of the courthouse. Pretty interesting. We'll get back into the whole Jacob Blake story and point out why that's so ridiculous. We'll be talking about Joe Biden and how he's been kind of trying to interfere with the trial in certain ways. And also, Grant is going to start us off by talking about how LeBron James and some other members of the media just can't help themselves but, say ridiculous things about Rittenhouse.
Yeah, so we've covered the trial pretty extensively. I feel like those who are reading our website, watching our show, probably understand the basic premises of the trial. He's on trial for killing two men during this riot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after the Jacob Blake shooting, which, like you said, we'll get into. And the question is basically whether or not it was self-defense or if he just deliberately murdered these guys. It seems pretty clear, like you said, that it was self-defense.
Yeah, he's getting chased down. There's people hitting him. There's a guy grabbing his gun.
Yeah.
There's a guy pointing a gun at him.
Exactly.
Seems pretty clear.
And so, as you might imagine, when something like that happens to a 17-year-old at the time, it can be pretty jarring for that to happen to you. It would be jarring for that to happen to me. I'm sure it's jarring for somebody who's 6 years younger than me. And so during this trial, he's been showing, I would say, some classic signs of PTSD, which is totally fair given what he's been through and what he was forced to do to defend himself, most likely.
And the defense just said today that he's getting treatment for PTSD. Okay. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it seems pretty clear he's going through that.
Yeah.
One of the things that was an example of this behavior was that during the trial, it was either yesterday or 2 days ago, he began crying as he was testifying on the stand. Yep. He was a witness. He testified for himself, which was an interesting
move.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he was testifying, and he began to cry on the stand as he recounted having to kill these two men and the way that he felt, the fear that he was feeling, that he was feeling threatened, and explaining why he felt it was necessary for him to kill these two men. And he began crying, and I think most normal people were sympathetic towards him, understood what he would be going through. Unfortunately, some of the more elitists in the left side of the aisle decided to mock him instead of feeling sympathetic towards him. One of those people was LeBron James, who is an NBA star and professional crybaby, actually. So it's pretty interesting that he decided to mock him.
Yeah.
We had a clip of LeBron flopping, but the producer said it wasn't exciting enough. So that's okay. That's all right. The point is that LeBron James likes to flop a lot, and he likes to cry.
He cries.
He cries.
Yeah.
He literally alligator tears.
There's a video of him during the NBA Finals. I think it was in 2014. He was on the Heat, and he got a cramp in his leg, and he's being carried off the court by like 3 trainers, and he's literally crying. Like tears are like coming out of his eyes.
Yes.
And so he's mocking this guy for fake crying. He said that, he must have had some lemon heads before he went out there to make himself look like he's crying. Obviously, that's a ridiculous thing to say, but my question to you guys is, why do people like LeBron James, these celebrities who really don't know what they're talking about? I'm pretty sure LeBron James hasn't been sitting there watching the trial all day.
Yeah.
Why do they feel the need to chime in on these sorts of things?
Well, it's because our media has made these people into saviors, you know? When people have celebrities on the top of the totem pole, so to speak, within society, that's all you have to really look for. And so there's a perfect example with Alec Baldwin. He went and criticized a police officer who was involved in a shooting and said, oh, look, now this guy's probably going to go away. I wonder if he can sleep at night. And then it's like 5 years later, and Alec Baldwin is on trial, or kind of by society, for doing the exact same thing. And so I think it's just a case of what goes around comes around. And it's just another example where our people who are celebrities are just so far removed from society that they don't actually think that anything can actually harm them or get them. And at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all going to be the same amount of like sinful, same amount of culpability, same, human, it's that's what it is at the end of the day. And we just put these people on a pedestal way too much.
Well, I definitely think it's the media's fault too. And I think if you read all these establishment media headlines from CNN, from MSNBC, from CNBC, all of the headlines make it look like, oh yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse is definitely guilty. And
100%.
Throughout this week, I've read a lot of those stories. I've poured through quite a few, and they'll put in the headlines something that makes Kyle Rittenhouse look bad. Towards the top of the article, they'll say something like, well, the defense made some good points, the prosecution made some good points. And then if you read through these articles, there are almost zero examples of the prosecution making any good points in the case because they haven't.
The prosecution has been terrible.
The prosecution, the prosecution's own witnesses have been basically giving testimony on behalf of the defense.
Yeah.
That's basically how this has gone. But it's the corruption in the media, because the media knows that most people are just going to read those headlines. And they see Rittenhouse as a figure, as a symbol for something larger. So some of them, I think, do know that he's innocent, but they also think, well, but he represents the right. He represents, the racist Trump crowd. So we need to sacrifice him. We need to prove a point that this stuff can't be tolerated. Otherwise, people might actually figure out that, yeah, the Black Lives Matter rioters were destroying Kenosha at the time, and it was a dangerous place to be. So, yeah, media headlines, I think, are the reason people like LeBron think that they can just say these things.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that and mentioned the media, the way they've been covering it, because that kind of gets into the next question I wanted to ask you guys, which is on Wednesday night, Chris Cuomo over at CNN was talking about this case. He was not exactly making the case that, Rittenhouse is definitely guilty, but it was definitely implied within his monologue that Rittenhouse should be considered
That's how they've
guilty.
all been doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't say it so explicitly, but you know what they mean. And he also, during this monologue, expressed, I would say, a general misunderstanding of how the justice system actually works in America.
Yeah.
So we have a clip here. We'll play it for you guys.
Is about imminent threat. You have to fear, to use deadly force, that someone is going to really hurt you, serious bodily injury or death. Was it reasonable under these circumstances? Is someone trying to take your gun? That, if that's what even was happening, was it reasonable to believe that that may happen? That's the standard, to use deadly force in Wisconsin. He admits he intended to use deadly force, so he is going to have to convince a jury, or the jury will have to feel convinced, that it was reasonable. The jury has the...
So, Kyle Rittenhouse, who's on trial, has to convince the jury that he's innocent. I don't think, is that how the justice system works?
We have another very big trial going on at the moment. The trial of, basically on the guys who allegedly murdered Ahmaud Arbery. And I have a feeling that if Chris Cuomo was to talk about that case, he would not use that same standard when talking about how they murdered that kid. So completely ridiculous, completely a double standard.
Yeah.
There's no way that's not a double standard.
No, it's not a double. It's just crazy. And the thing I want to point out too that I think is really funny about Chris Cuomo going on TV and talking about this is his own brother is the same one at the center of these huge sexual assault allegations. And Chris Cuomo's like, you know what's a perfect time for a 2-week vacation? Right when that drops.
Yeah,
I'm gonna back up from that, and I'm also gonna basically, let him get away with all of the COVID deaths and the nursing homes and all of these other issues. And so it just shows how ridiculously biased our media is. And it definitely is a case of the pot calling the kettle black. And I think the irony there is just definitely worth mentioning.
Michael, do you think that our justice system is going to be able to survive? We talk about these celebrities, the media, all trying to decide verdicts before they're actually decided. How does our justice system continue to work during that?
I don't know. I mean, it's more than that. I mean, they're politicizing every case. You have big tech censoring people for saying certain things about Rittenhouse, like he was probably innocent in defending himself. Facebook, that's happening. Twitter, that kind of thing is happening. You have Democratic politicians calling him a white supremacist with no basis for that claim. Will the justice system survive? Well, let's see what happens. The 3 men that attacked Rittenhouse, okay, the first one, we know for a fact the dude grabbed his gun and was screaming at him, and that's when Rittenhouse started firing. The second guy was bashing him over the head with a skateboard, and the third guy was advancing on him, pointing a gun straight at him. So if that's not self-defense, if they don't determine that was self-defense, no, there is no justice system. There is no self-defense in this country anymore.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I don't think that there's anything that's kind of really salvageable at this point if it's not self-defense. I mean, we opened the show by saying, if there even should be a case. So I think that's kind of all you need to really even say on the matter.
Yeah.
And, it's not just LeBron James and Chris Cuomo. We actually have some pretty prominent politicians deciding to weigh in on this case, even though they don't know anything about it.
Yeah. America's favorite president, Joe Biden, who barely passed the bar exam, never really got to live out his attorney dream. So he's decided he wants to be on team prosecution in this case. And I'm not even being dramatic, I don't think, because if we remember back to 2020, during one of the most heated presidential elections ever in recorded history, we'd remember that Joe Biden sent out an amazing tweet on September 30th, 2020, that literally painted Kyle Rittenhouse as a white supremacist. And we actually have that video for you today.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
So if you caught that, there's just Kyle Rittenhouse in that infamous picture walking around with his gun. And that video got viewed a whopping 3.3 million times. And I think it would be really, really ignorant to assume that video played no bearing on the presidential election, because at the end of the day, the 2020 presidential election, the entire Biden campaign could be summed up into 3 words: I'm not Trump. And that's what people ultimately voted on. But I just kind of want to ask you guys the following question. With seeing that, how irresponsible do you think it was for Joe Biden to place Kyle Rittenhouse in that video? And wouldn't you think that Biden's infamous henchmen would have caught that and thought, maybe this is going to be a legal issue later on?
Yeah, it's incredibly irresponsible. And I think that it's even the same argument that they were trying to make against Trump during the presidential campaign. It's like, why won't you condemn white supremacy? He's like, well, I have condemned this and this and this. I'm not going to condemn Kyle Rittenhouse because that's not white supremacy. Yeah. They're like, why won't you condemn every single thing that we say is white supremacy?
Yes.
And he's like, I'll condemn what's actually white supremacy. I won't condemn your fake white supremacy. And so they try to bring all these things together as if they're the same. And they show that picture of Kyle Rittenhouse with like actual white supremacists with torches in Charlottesville. I mean, like, those are white supremacists. Kyle Rittenhouse defending himself, that's not white supremacy. And they try to equate it to make it the same thing. And it's incredibly irresponsible. It's dishonest journalism.
I can't. It's the president of the United States. That video got viewed 3.3 million times.
Yep.
There's zero evidence that this kid is a white supremacist.
Yeah.
There's nothing. The 3 guys he shot were all white, and one of them was yelling the N-word.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Yeah. And weren't all of them, like, not that it's like, okay, but all of them had prior criminal records. I
Yes.
think all of them were felons. Like,
Well, the man who was grabbing the gun, the man who they're saying, oh yeah, he was just trying to save the day. He wasn't trying to kill Kyle Rittenhouse. This dude raped 5 children in the past. So that's one of the guys that Kyle Rittenhouse took out. Just in case you were wondering if these were just the saints that you've been told they are.
yeah, it's funny how in every shooting or everything that's blown up by the media, it's always Saint so and so and Saint so and so this.
Yeah, I do love the way they talk about. I mean, they talk about victims and like, yes, technically they're victims because they died, but they're like, oh, these victims, their families. I'm like,
Yeah.
these are not angels. Like,
Yeah.
these are
Yeah.
criminals.
Yeah, they're like, Mother Teresa's best friend you haven't heard about. Like, that's like how the media presents it.
Well, and one shocking thing that I keep saying about this story too is, there's a lot of liberals that are just immediately, Kyle Rittenhouse is evil. Kyle Rittenhouse needs to, be brought to justice for his crimes. But what I'm seeing is like real liberals, like people that are pretty far left that actually watch trial footage, their opinions start to change. Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks, for instance, she's changed her mind. I've seen other, prominent blue check liberals on Twitter saying, hey guys, if you actually watch the trial footage, it seems like this kid actually didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least he didn't commit murder.
Yeah, even especially in the drone footage that the prosecution has rested their entire case on. If you watch that footage, that guy's probably as close to me. Like if I'm Kyle Rittenhouse, that guy probably was where Grant's sitting right now when Kyle decided to pull the trigger. And apparently during that entire altercation, he was like friendly, like warning people multiple times.
And he was sprinting away from them.
Yeah.
That kid did every possible thing he could have done to not shoot somebody.
Yeah.
Like-
and the guy threatened to kill him twice before that. At one of them, like said, "Oh, if I find you alone, you're dead." And then if I find you alone, part 2, it's I'm going to cut out your heart. So it's like to say that these people were just like mainstream people walking down the street nonchalant. Like it's such a big lie. But the real news of at least this segment on Kyle Rittenhouse is that Rittenhouse's mom actually went on Hannity last night and revealed her grievances with the video that you just watched here. And she said, when I saw that, I was shocked. I was angry. President Biden doesn't know my son whatsoever, and he's not a white supremacist. He's not a racist. And Biden did that for votes. Then she continues, and I was so angry for a while at him and what he did to my son. He defamed him. So his mom is rightfully upset. I think that if my child were sitting on a murder trial, being told, having the entire country told that he's guilty, it's not going to matter at this point in time whether or not the jury comes back with a guilty verdict, because if Kyle Rittenhouse walks free, probably over half the United States is going to be like, that kid is a murderer. He's going to be completely maligned, probably going to have to go into witness protection. And so I think that that's like the main issue here. But my question to you guys is how would you feel if that was your family member or friend, literally being dragged online by the president during one of the most highly watched presidential elections in the country? And do you think President Biden should be held responsible?
I mean, I would never stop talking about it, for one. And it seems like, she's not quite done speaking out about it. It's just, I can't imagine someone just saying, something horrible happens to someone that I love. Some people try to murder him or her.
Yeah.
And he or she, uses self-defense to save his or her life. I should have chosen a his or her when I started this. This is really pulling me down. But to have the president of the United States, I mean, this was before, I believe this was before a jury was selected. This video
yeah.
now.
Yeah,
So
it was like a month.
3.3 million people. Many of them could have been potential jurors, I assume. I assume the people from Kenosha, Washington were interested in that video and the contents therein. They would all now be under the impression, well, the president of the United States says this guy's a white supremacist.
It must be true.
Must be true.
Yeah, and he was a sitting vice president of the United States. So there's just an added level to it. But what do you think, Grant?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's 2 like levels. There is the fact that morally and just like humanly, this is a terrible thing to do to someone because, like his mom said, Joe Biden doesn't know Kyle Rittenhouse. He doesn't know the first thing about him. He doesn't know if he's a white supremacist. And so that's just an irresponsible and just honestly like rude thing to do to someone, is to say, I know everything about you and I know that you're a terrible person, even though I've never met you. And all I know is like this one moment about you that paints you in a bad light in my eyes. So that means I know everything about you. So that's like, from a human interest point, there's that problem. Then there's also the problem of, like you said, he's the vice president of the United States. He's now the president of the United States. And so that kind of stuff affects cases. Like that kind of thing, if you, like Michael said, if you are convincing 3.3 million Americans before a trial occurs that this person is a white supremacist and that he should basically be considered guilty before the trial even starts, before the jury's even selected, that affects the outcome.
Yeah, and not to like completely switch topics in the middle of what we're discussing, but I do think it's relevant, is that when the George Floyd case was being decided, and that was going on, you not only had Maxine Waters down in Minneapolis being like, "Oh, we need to make sure that these people know we mean business." Joe Biden himself, who was sitting president at that time, literally said, "I hope the jury makes the right decision in this case." That is completely irresponsible, and I know that he got flack for that then. So I just don't think that there's any excuse here.
In the context, so both of those people, Waters and Biden, they said those things in the context knowing that throughout 2020, cities were burned down by these racial justice protesters. So it's like, if we don't get our way in court, we're going to burn down your city. And there have already been threats that, Kenosha is going to get burned down if the jurors don't decide a certain way. So it's, going back to the question from, earlier, do we have a fair and free justice system if the Black Lives Matter crowd, the racial justice protesters can just go out and threaten to destroy cities? I mean, now, can we blame this directly on Black Lives Matter? It's a little iffy, but when they go out there and they protest and they make these huge crowds and these huge demonstrations, they know full well, they've had a year of experience. They know full well there will be looters and rioters that follow them, and they do it anyway.
Yeah.
So they're going to threaten to destroy cities if they don't get their way.
And one more point, because I know we're just kind of maybe going off here, but it's like people on Twitter also being like, "Oh, well, why was he there in the first place?" It's like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have established a precedent that it's okay to burn down your city. How about that?
Yeah,
Like,
maybe if the police were there, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. So, switching topics to a different aspect of this whole Rittenhouse situation, Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake, was actually outside of the courthouse the other day. I believe it was 2 days ago. Don't quote me on that. Protesting against Kyle Rittenhouse. Mm-hmm. And he told reporters, this was the day that Rittenhouse appeared on the stand. He spoke, and basically Justin Blake said, "Oh, he lied. He definitely is lying. He was inconsistent today." Another protester there with Blake. Blake was the leader of this protest. Said, out of Rittenhouse's own mouth, he knew he was using deadly force. And yes, Kyle Rittenhouse did admit to using deadly force. He said, "Well, I was using deadly force to stop the threat that was trying to hurt me, that was trying to kill me. I wasn't using deadly." He repeatedly said, "I wasn't using deadly force with the intent to kill. I was using deadly force with the intent to defend myself." Mm-hmm. But anyway, putting that aside, I find it hilarious that Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake, would accuse Rittenhouse of lying when, in fact, Jacob Blake, his nephew, and the whole Blake family, they're the ones who were lying. They lied to police about about Jacob Blake having a knife. And probably back up for a minute. So who's Jacob Blake? Well, the whole Rittenhouse situation, the riots that were going on in Kenosha at the time, the only reason that they were happening was because of the police shooting of Jacob Blake that had happened, I believe, a few days earlier, maybe a week or so.
Yeah.
And so Jacob Blake, and if you read the news, Jacob Blake, they'll tell you that Jacob Blake was a black man who was shot 7 times in the back by a white police officer. That is the extent of the story you will get if you read it in the news. This is what actually happened, all right? A woman who claims that Jacob Blake raped her called police to the scene. Police arrived. Jacob Blake started resisting arrest. He started fighting with officers. He refused to drop a knife he reportedly had in his right hand. Officers kept trying to detain him. They didn't shoot him. He sprinted to his car, reached inside, and that is when the officer shot him 7 times. So it's a little different than just an officer just randomly shooting a black guy 7 times in the back. This guy was resisting arrest. He had a deadly weapon, and he was reaching into his car to get who knows what. You know, they later found the knife there, so maybe he was dumping it. Maybe he was trying to grab another knife. It's a little murky on what exactly happened, but you know, that is an immediate threat to that officer's life, and they had a right to shoot him. And so, you know, Jacob Blake and his family and his family's lawyers over the next week, they told the media, oh, no, I didn't have a knife. He didn't have a knife. The police just shot him out of nowhere. Well, they all lied.
Yeah.
Turns out he did. And he later admitted, oh, yeah, I lied about it. Sorry. So Justin Blake, you know, just get off your high horse. You have no idea what you're talking about. And another part of this that just disturbs me so much, and I want to get your guys' opinion on this, is that still, we know all of these facts about Jacob Blake. We know all these facts about Rittenhouse. We know that all 3 of those guys posed a threat to his life. We know that Jacob Blake posed a threat to the life of that officer. And yet, the media, the left, all of those people still, you know, they defend Jacob Blake to the death, and they want to see Kyle Rittenhouse burn. What do you guys think about that? Like, how does this happen? We have all of the facts. We know what happened in both cases. How have we gotten here?
We've gotten here because we've viewed. Okay, this is going to be a little bit of a philosophical conversation. I started out and I'm like, wait, I got to back up.
Okay.
The point of leftism is that truth has become whatever their moral fabric is. That's what their pursuit of truth is. So if you agree with the left on like all of these like multiple genders and all of that and like pursue the narrative, that's what goes forward. And I believe AOC has said that like, oh, the facts don't really matter as much as like whatever, or the narrative. There's something like that to that extent. And so I think when it comes to these cases and in the media doesn't really care so much about the facts. They're caring more so about the narrative. Journalists can pride themselves on getting a blue check mark on Twitter, getting a few thousand retweets, and that's what journalism has become. When you go and actually look at the facts, they're completely missing the point. I'm sitting here watching these people and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I took journalism 101. In journalism 101, my professors emphasized time and time again, you have to be factually inaccurate. You have to be factually accurate. You can't stretch the truth. You have to go back. And they would criticize people all the time and be like, hey, you're making an assumption here. Look out for some assumptions in your writing. Yeah. And apparently all of these journalists on Twitter missed the memo. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's really just horrible to witness, because you're seeing these people promote these ideas and values and then getting a bunch of retweets, and then there's like, oh, here's this tiny correction after the fact. CBS morning show can go on Twitter and go, Kyle Rittenhouse after murdering 2 people, and it's like, he's still on trial.
Yeah.
Oh, we screwed up. Let us just delete the tweet. It's like, what? The damage is already done.
Yeah. And, you know, moving to your thoughts, Grant, I thought an interesting point to bring up that kind of ties back into your topic on LeBron. LeBron defended Jacob Blake to the death. He still claims that, you know, it was not a justified shooting, that this is another example of racism in America. So he defended Jacob Blake, who reportedly raped that woman who called police to the scene. He appears, I mean, by making fun of Rittenhouse, he appears to be defending the guys trying to kill him, including the child rapist. So it's kind of weird that LeBron James, in this environment, you know, the way the media is, the way everything is, LeBron James is defending rapists over 17-year-old kids that people are trying to murder. That seems a little weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the same thing that Tara just said. And I just attended a premiere of a movie about January 6th, and that's going to be coming out on our website later. And that had the quote of AOC in there. She said something to the effect of the facts. Like, too many people care about the facts and they don't care about being morally right.
Yeah, morally right.
No, that's exactly what she said.
To her, what she means by morally right is like what I think about just the state of America. She thinks that this shooting of Jacob Blake was an example of racism. And so it doesn't matter to her that he had a knife or that he was threatening or that he was a rapist. It matters to her that she thinks the morally right thing is that if he is not found guilty, because she believes that he is the victim of a racist attack from a white police officer. And so I think it goes to the same thing. I think that LeBron James, honestly, I feel like he probably doesn't understand the facts of these cases that he's talking about. He just sees headlines, like you said, from the media on Twitter, whatever. the dude is practicing basketball. Like the season is in session right now. He's practicing all day. He's playing. He doesn't have time to go read up on all these things. But because these narratives are so prevalent in the media,
exactly,
and because we have made more of an emphasis on the narratives than the facts, that's all he sees. And so he parrots them.
So he defends rapists, and he refuses to condemn genocidal regimes.
Yeah.
because he's just following what the news tells him to. And I really think, just to tie things up, what you guys are saying about what AOC said about, the truth is not important as like doing what's morally right. Mm-hmm. That is the crux of why why Kyle Rittenhouse is even on trial. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think a lot of these leftists, I think this freaking prosecutor knows that Kyle Rittenhouse is probably innocent. But everyone, the media, the Democrats, liberal activists, they all see this as an opportunity. They see this as a symbol for a larger problem that they see in society. And they're fully willing to sacrifice an innocent kid if that means furthering their agenda.
Yeah, no, it's completely empowering to them. And I think, again, it goes back to what was allowed with George Floyd. I mean, we talk about a slippery slope all the time, and we've all sat here and laid out the facts, and we can say, hey, we don't think Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty. But when you're allowing political pressure to form a case against George Floyd, it's not that hard to make the next step, which is just letting some innocent kid, presumably innocent from what we can tell, go to prison.
Yeah. Any last thoughts?
I mean, I think that's pretty much what you said is the crux of, like you said, the issue with leftism, which is that they will sacrifice anyone from a 17-year-old kid to children
children who aren't old enough to make sexual decisions.
Yeah. They'll sacrifice whatever they need
blockers.
In order to forward their agenda. And that's what makes it so scary.
Yeah. Well, and, if you want to fight back against that scariness, against the left's insanity, their anti-truth crusade, make sure you join us in the fight here at the Western Journal. There's plenty of ways you can do that. You can subscribe by going to www.westernjournal.com/join. That's probably the best way you can help us. It subverts big tech. We don't have to rely on Facebook. We don't have to rely on Google getting our stories out there to you. You can get them directly to you. You can subscribe to our email list, to our newsletters. You could subscribe to our platform on all of those big tech tyrants' sites, Facebook, YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/WJLive. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can see future see shows when they come out, see notifications when new shows are out. And also, we've been trying a new thing by moving over to Rumble. It seems like the one video platform out there that isn't fully corrupted to the left's insane anti-truth agenda, which is great. So, you can check out the Western Journal on Rumble as well. And I think that's all we have for you guys this week. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.